So today we are going to take the opportunity to maybe cause you all to reflect a little bit more intentionally about AI, because I noticed that when Amanda asked you, what did you think about AI? It was very quiet. So I'm hoping that as a result of the panelists that we bring together today, that you will be able to sort of leave the room with some interesting points of view, I think, that we have put together. So let me just first tell you how this is going to go. I am going to bring each panelist up one by one, and they're going to answer our questions, and then we're going to sit for a nice little chat. So let's start off with our first panelist from the CEO from the Center for Public Sector AI, Justin Brown.
All right. Good morning. Good morning.
Justin.
Hey, thank you for having me. Good morning.
Hello, everyone. Justin, before you launched the center, you had a long career in government, like many folks in this room, most recently as the Secretary of Human Services for the state of Oklahoma. So, with the public servant mindset I would like you to tell us, what should we be talking more about when it comes to AI in government?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, from my perspective, we need to be talking a lot more about foundation. So certainly technical capacity and that type of foundation, but more so a culture and values foundation in government. So it was clear during the pandemic that there were some systems across the country, and I worked in the health and human services system, so some systems across the country who had put in the really hard work of building authentic culture and values and those sorts of foundational elements. And those that did were the ones who were on offense during the pandemic. They thrived. And then it was clear that there were lots of other agencies across the country who had not yet done that work. And those were the ones who were on defense. Yeah, so I'm a believer that this work around artificial intelligence and emerging technologies is another major disruption in our systems. Good disruption, bad disruption, it's up to you, and we'll see how it plays out. But we have to start with this deep foundation of who we are and why we're here, what our mission is. Because I do believe that disruptions like this are an opportunity to entrench values and to really intensify and accelerate transformation. And we should be using this as that opportunity. So when we talk about foundation and values, we talk about operationalizing those as well. So how do we build outcomes and metrics that really allow for us to drive technology transformation, to accelerate the work that we're doing around our values and our culture that we're trying to build. As an aside, it's interesting, I think, that for the last probably year and a half, I've been working with state HHS leaders across the country to build a targeted set of cultural values across the nation. Now, of course, every state has their own sort of values that they want to add to it, but we really created 4 cultural elements that we're trying to build as a national health and human services system. The first, you heard it on the last panel, is that we are human-centered. We put the person that we're trying to serve in the center of transformation and build around them. That also includes our workforce that's so important. We are outcomes-driven. I've already mentioned it, but the idea of directing our attention and focus towards the things that matter to the people that we serve and to our workforce. We're relationship-focused. These systems talk with thousands of community partners in their states, legislators, policymakers, all these people. And so we have to do this together or transformation really can't take root. And the last is kind of specific to HHS, but we are trauma-informed and hope-centered, building pathways for families to exit multi-generational poverty or meet their level of success. So I'm a believer that if we talk about foundation in cultures and values and we operationalize those, it allows us to use disruption as a fuel for transformation instead of it sort of bringing fear to our systems.
So I just want to note that Justin spoke about things without mentioning AI at all.
I did, that's right.
And so these are all things that I think are already embedded in some of our organizations, and you've identified them as public interest values in some ways. So I want to give a head nod to that as the Director of Public Interest Tech. So I also want to welcome our second panelist, Traci Walker, Executive Director of the Digital Services Coalition. Welcome, Traci. I know Traci is very well known around these parts, as she indicated. We talked about the fact that we all were at the very last Code for America Summit in Oakland just before the pandemic. So, Traci, you also have had a long career in government as a procurement pioneer. I love that, pioneer. But I also want to just give a nod and a shout to let everyone know that we're probably going to be playing some strange bingo here because you know we're going to mention procurement many times today. So,
yes.
And Traci was the director of procurement at the U.S. Digital Service before she entered the private sector just 3 years ago. So, Traci, how might AI change the government bid process?
Well, I think to understand AI is to also understand that right now we're going to have a rise of the AI snake oil salesman, and or woman, equal opportunity snake oil out there. And I think it's important to understand that market research really needs to change in this sector right now, thinking about it. Use your trusted partners and your networks, not just to send out requests for information, but to think about how can I understand what industry is learning at a faster pace than what government is going to be learning, because their bottom line really depends on it a lot more in that sense. So I think understanding and having the good trusted conversation with industry partners, as opposed to just saying, this is just about bid and development and money and that kind of thing, really diving in and saying, well, who's doing it right? How is it getting done? And how can I learn from it? I would say leverage this conference and find a AI buddy that you can pick up the phone and say, hey, we just heard about this new thing. Good? Bad? What do we know? What do we know? And try to figure that out as we go through this. The other thing is looking at how can we leverage AI as part of the augmentation of service and service delivery. I'm lucky enough to represent 48 companies that do service delivery and digital services. They're learning this path, and just the same way that when we think about students using ChatGPT to write their term papers, we know that software developers are going to be using AI tools to write code. Whether or not you tell them they can't, whether or not you're saying, don't do this, it's going to happen. It's just a natural progression of what these tools can do. So use that as part of your procurement process to say, give me great capacity in terms of who can use these tools to leverage, and maybe instead of 5 junior developers, you have 1 AI system and a senior developer who's really looking at how can that code work, and ultimately that might save money in the long run. And then the third and final kind of conversation around this is that you cannot do AI without having good data. And so in every procurement you should be doing now with AI, you should add data discovery, data engineering, data analytics, because we know that AI isn't sentient yet. So it's going to believe what you tell it. So if you tell it the sky is green, it's always going to think the sky is green. So going in and understanding that that data is the key component to doing this is a task you must include in all of the procurements. And if people are saying, no, you don't need this, or no, you don't need to understand your data, go back to the first point, snake oil salesman. So, thank you.
I think one of the things I want you all to remember from what Traci said is get yourself an AI buddy, and you're at the right place. And also the mention of data, which is something that you all have been thinking about for far longer than we've been talking about AI. So again, we're grounding it in existing practices. And our third panelist, please help us welcome Jonathan Porat, our Chief Technology Officer for the state of California. Callie represented. Thanks, Jonathan. So much of AI is rooted in experimentation. However, we know government agencies must be especially thoughtful about how the ethical implications and potential risks will impact individuals. As someone navigating this challenge right now, how can government strike a balance between innovation and safeguarding public interests?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Andreen, and glad to hear that the West Coasters are starting to wake up now that we're a couple of sessions into the morning program. Our AI vision really comes from an executive order that was signed last year from Governor Newsom. And the thing that I'm most proud about in the way that our state has handled AI implementation is that we've intentionally built a very deliberative and iterative process so that we're constantly experimenting, evaluating, and improving. So before we even talked about technology, we started working with our community, labor, and technology partners to understand what are those benefits that we're hoping to get from AI, and what are those risks that we're hoping to prevent or mitigate. We took a look at how we're using AI conventionally throughout the state, and we issued some high-level guidance and policies. And to test those, we built into our AI executive order the need for a generative AI sandbox at the state. And very recently, we're proud to announce that we've awarded contracts for 5 proofs of concept that are high-level value propositions that we think are going to be useful across the state. So things like analyzing large data sets, or language access, or helping out with call centers. And we're using this experimentation as a way to test whether we're able to use our governance to meet those values. So it's been critical for us to be able to work with our community partners, our labor partners throughout, to ensure that our technology and the way that we're implementing this technology is in alignment with those things that we care the most about, not replacing workers, ensuring our technology is equitable, ensuring that we are able to protect and secure the data from our residents. So what I encourage you to do is to build some experimentation into your AI planning, hold yourself accountable, but make sure you have those high-level questions and values figured out up front so that you can use that as a way to learn by doing and really test to make sure that you're living up to those high-level standards that you've set for yourself.
So thank you so much, Jonathan. I feel like we're building on a theme here. And finally, I would like to invite Sanmi Koyejo to the stage, assistant professor at Stanford and board president of Black in AI. Sanmi is hometown, right?
Yep.
Didn't encounter too much traffic getting here. Sanmi, your research at Stanford focuses on making AI more trustworthy. Let's talk about an area where trust is really key, making decisions that will impact people's lives. In government, leaders make decisions every day that can open or close someone else's access to the services they need. When people make those calls, I think we assume that folks are weighing really difficult choices and are making trade-offs. How are decisions made by AI different, though? That's what we're curious about. So specifically, we want you to answer sort of how should government balance human decision-making with AI decision-making?
Thanks for the easy question. So,
softball for you.
Indeed. So I'll say a few things first about the technology and then maybe engage in a broader question. On technology, I think one key aspect of a lot of technology, but I think specifically AI and decision-making is scale. So, humans make decisions slowly, because kind of we have to. Within a day, if you're making decisions for, say, housing, you're looking at hundreds, maybe thousands if you're somehow efficient. AI can do millions or billions. Like the scale of what AI can do in terms of decision-making really has a big impact on how many decisions are being made, and makes it much more difficult to do things like audit and understand what the decision-making processes are. Another important aspect of technology is that AI, we were discussing earlier, is built on data. This data, I think some of the less glossy part of looking at data when AI makes decisions is that it actually reflects back to us what we are. And sometimes we don't like what we see when we look back in the mirror. So historical biases, for instance, end up being embedded in the AI tool and end up being reflected back in the kinds of decisions and biases that AI tools can have. And so, for instance, with Black in AI, some of our members did some work showing how AI tools, because of both data discrepancies and also issues with tool building, end up having, say, disparate accuracy across different, say, for Black people versus others. Along similar lines, I think there's a significant issue with who builds technology. So again, we forget, but AI is built by humans, folks like you and me here in this room. Humans are fallible. Humans come with their biases in the room. Sometimes we have blind spots. And so some of what we often argue is some of the gaps in AI technology comes from the fact that people building these tools just don't have, each person has their own lived experience. They bring those lived experiences into how they think about technology design. And when there are gaps in those lived experiences, they end up reflecting in the way tools are built. So again, this example of performance of models, AI models being different for different racial groups often comes because there's not a recognition of the experience, lived experiences of different groups being so different across, say, the state or in the country. In terms of what government should do to engage in this technology, I think one important one, and some of this is happening here, is first to actually engage. I think often the tooling is mystified and sort of thought of in these quite lofty sounding kinds of terms. I think the core technology is quite accessible, and I think the key sort of insights and mental models for what AI is doing is reasonably accessible. I think more of us should demand, and part of my role in academia is also thinking about how to engage more in sort of public education and help people understand the core technology. I think there's enough that we can learn to make this seem less mystical, and I think that would actually help in engaging technology. I think it's meaningful to think of AI tooling as human-centered. I help with the Human-Centered AI Center at Stanford. We think about ways to build AI technology and ways to augment people, and sort of the key mode is helping people be better at what they're doing as opposed to replacement. I think the replacement story is problematic, and it's often inaccurate. The tools are not good at doing that. And so having ways of thinking about deploying technology, but always having humans in the loop to check things, to pull up hard cases for people to better understand and engage with, I think this can be meaningful ways of trying to improve the way technology is deployed. Finally, I think there's a lot of scope to think about auditing. So I think some of what, again, my research work tries to engage with is ways that we can build measurement tools. I think this came up earlier as well. So understand better where the tools are good, where the tools are bad. I think some of the issues with AI, to my earlier comments, also comes from miscalibration in what the tools can do, both under and over. So we overhype and overthink where the tools are good or undersell what they can do. And so often trust comes from well-calibrated understanding of what the tools can actually do. So the expectation matches the reality. Some of this can be improved by better audits, both for performance, but also things like bias, fairness, safety. And so we're building some other tooling to try to engage with this question. I think some of these will be important for government deploying AI technologies for decision making.
Well, I think you've just dropped the gauntlet. So I think I'm going to ask Jonathan and Justin to pick it up, which is, I'd love to hear your thought. If government gets AI right, what does it look like in 5 years? Many in response to Sanmi's challenge.
Yeah. So one thing that we've learned from this initial implementation is that we need to innovate the way that we govern technology. Just having a bunch of checklists or having governance that's kind of more conventional and focused on, are we using this type of encryption or meeting these types of security standards, may not be sufficient to answer some of the questions that we're talking about, even though those are still important questions. And so while we thought about that differently, we're also thinking about our people differently. One thing that I am really excited about is that the sandboxes I discussed we've built on our state-managed cloud infrastructure, and not only that, but the folks who are managing those projects are folks from our platform services department. So these are the managers for Unix systems, Windows systems, some of the oldest legacy systems at the state. So ironically, the teams that are managing some of our oldest systems are now the teams managing some of the most cutting edge technology that we have at the state. So if we're able to implement AI correctly, I'm hoping that folks will start to appreciate that government not only has the capacity to innovate, but government has been innovating and really leading in this space when it comes to answering some of those tough questions and finding ways to really utilize our people, our processes, and our technology in some different ways to improve the services that we're providing our residents.
Well, that was powerful. The only thing that I would add is I think if we're doing it right with AI in the next 5 years, we've built a foundation on outcomes, so we know ahead of time what we're trying to achieve, and again, that really allows for us to entrench our values. These outcomes are built on what matters for humans, not necessarily outputs for systems, but outcomes for people, and we're able to build a mechanism that allows for us to follow those outcomes as we see technology evolve and be implemented. So to me, it's all about how are we serving humans at the end of the day, and outcomes should matter.
And Traci, I'm going to give you the final word. How might we use AI in government to drive more equitable outcomes for the public?
So I think there's a couple different aspects about equity when we think through this. One is that the skill sets are going to, I think, level the playing field a little bit, where soft skills are going to become as important as technical skills in trying to understand how to deal with ethics and communication and the human aspect of this. These skill sets have been somewhat underutilized, I think, and we look at the universe of tech as being somewhat more male-dominated, and I think this will kind of level that playing field. The other area where equity comes in is access to education and access to more data. We do talk about data, but it's information as well. Products that come out that can help give you, access to all of the laws, of all of the, open education resources, and providing ways for people to get educated in new ways that they may not have the ability, the money for it, or anything like that, will then increase, I think, the overall understanding of both technology, but a lot of other civil and government factors that people have to work with on a day-to-day basis.
Well, thank you all so much for such a comprehensive panel. I hope that you all take the opportunity to catch some of our panelists as they're with us through the rest of the day. Thank you all so much for this conversation.